The Dominion are very unique within the context of Star Trek because, unlike every other major civilization, they're pretty much the only example I can think of in the universe that is a theocracy. Now, there might be some minor, crappy civilization that is a theocracy, but in general, the governments in Star Trek are secular, if not imposing state atheism. The Federation is completely secular to the point where humans have basically abandoned all religion and are actively anti religious. You have the Romulans who have this weird kind of animistic religion based on the elements. The Klingons are probably the most spiritual, although their religion is a weird mixture of Shintoism and Norse paganism, but I don't think the Klingons have any gods. It's not particularly well developed. I guess, ironically enough, probably the most religious faction in the Star Trek universe is the Ferengi, but we can go into their beliefs another time. But the pursuit of profit is extremely important to the Ferengi religion, and it's kind of, I'm not sure if the religion is what caused it or if the religion was based around their natural greed, but I digress. So the Dominion are by far the largest traditional, or I guess you could say, I'm trying to think of how to describe it. The conventional, probably the largest conventional power in the Star Trek universe by a substantial margin. This is just kind of a random map I found, but I think it's fairly accurate. The Dominion Empire is almost as big as the Borg Collective. In fact, the Dominion is substantially larger than all the conventional empires in the Alpha and Beta quadrants we know of put together. It's so large and so massive that once we get into the Dominion War plotline, the Dominion is more or less able to steamroll all of the Alpha and Beta quadrant powers combined with very little effort. The only reason that the Dominion is even involved at all with the whole Star Trek universe as we normally see it is because of the wormhole around Bajor, which is, I think, yeah, right there, Bajor. And then there's a wormhole that goes into the middle of Dominion space, pretty close to its capital world where the founders live. So that's really the only reason they kind of come into the fray. As to the cause of the Dominion War, there's a number of different, I guess, factors that lead up to it. I think the main thing, though, is the religious ideology of the Dominion. So what is the ideology of the Dominion, and why do I call it a theocracy? So the heart of Dominion is the founders, or the Changelings as they're called within the powers outside of the Dominion. So the story goes that thousands of years ago, the Changelings were persecuted across the galaxy, and they continued to run and flee, and everyone was trying to kill them. Now, Changelings are a race who are biologically and to a large extent physically immortal, who can, as their name suggests, transform into any shape. They seem to be able to convert their mass as well. As Changelings have been shown to transform into birds, they can transform into fire, into metal, into all kinds of things, and it's completely undetectable. The only way to really detect a changeling is to use a low power phaser with a wide screen, which disrupts their ability to cloak and forces them back into their regular form. You can also take a blood test, as if their blood leaves their body, it will revert back to a changeling's raw state. So the Changelings were pursued across the galaxy, and eventually they decided the only way to ensure the security of their people and a continuation for Changeling and a future for Changeling children was to found a conventional empire of their own. Now, the foundations of the Dominion are murky. The Vorcha have their own theory as to it, where they talk about how, in part, the founders were saved by a group of Vorcha on their homeworld, and they were elevated as payment, as kind of a return on that. But more or less, what the Dominion wound up doing was using their extremely long lifespans and knowledge base. They decided to set up an empire based on on a genetically engineered caste system. In particular, the Dominion is made up of two principal species other than the founders, the Jem'Hadar and the Vorcha. The Vorcha are very intelligent. They occupy the entire command structure, bureaucracy, all of the scientists. They're engineered to be intelligent, to have a high verbal and mathematical IQ. So the Vorcha are all extremely Machiavellian and backstabbing, and they try to kill each other as often as possible. This is deliberately engineered into part of their, I guess you could say, genetic programming, as it prevents them from forming any sort of conspiracy against the founders, because none of them even trust each other. However, the Vorcha are almost all, both through genetic engineering and through just culture and conditioning, fanatically religious and worship the founders as gods. So even though they will stab and backstab and try to kill one another, at the same time the Vorcha are capable of uh, are incapable, of defying the founders directly. And indeed, you have Weyoun, who's a complete sociopath, but is sycophantically and fanatically loyal to the founders. The other race you have is the Jem'Hadar, which are engineered to be super soldiers. They're much stronger and more resistant and have better senses than pretty much any race we've seen, to the point where they can beat the shit out of Klingons in a physical fight. So the Jem'Hadar are interesting because they mature very quickly. I think it's in a matter of days after they're born. And all the Jem'Hadar require to function is Ketrasil White, which is a drug that provides all their nourishment. Jem'Hadar are also addicted to Ketrasil White, and they die if they don't take it for a couple days. Once again, another form of control. There can't be really a palace coup or an uprising within the Dominion, because the Changelings and Vorcha control the entire supply of Ketrasil White. And it's carefully monitored and carefully rationed. So the Jem'Hadar are one dose away from dying out. So despite their immense physical and military power, they're really incapable of ever moving against the founders. But it's not even really necessary, as they're genetically engineered to lack a lot of the traits of the Vorcha. So they're just 100% fanatically loyal, to the point that they have no compunction whatsoever of dying, and they consider it a honor to die for the founders. I don't think any Jem'Hadars live past the age of 30 because they die at such a high rate. Although, because they're so powerful physically, they tend to also kill a lot of people. So with these two races that are optimized for conquering and administering an empire, the Dominion just exploded out of their homeworld and expanded across the Gamma Quadrant, conquering much of it and becoming the universe's largest conventional power. It's an interesting question as whether they could take on the Borg, but we'll never see something like that, as this universe is basically dead at that point in time. But yeah, so the Dominion is massive, and they just kind of continue to expand and expand. The founders' justification for their empire is twofold. The first being that they're naturally distrusted by solids, as they call them, and that solids won't rest until they're exterminated, because solids are just scared of them, because of their knowledge, their immortality, and their ability to take on the appearance of any solid. Later on, once they start to infiltrate the alpha and beta quadrants, they are able to assume high-ranking positions within the various empires and start multiple wars to weaken the various powers in preparation of their invasion. They also believe that solids are short-sighted and need to be controlled. This is because solids are limited to one form and one perspective. The founders believe their ability to change shape, as well as their long lifespans, makes them much more enlightened and the only group possible of bringing order to the universe and establishing a species-based caste system throughout it. So the Dominion, because they're able to basically manufacture Vorcha and manufacture Jem'Hadar, they can expand exponentially. The majority of the Changelings spend their time in the Great Link, in which all the Changelings are kind of merged together into a hive mind or collective consciousness in their home planet. Ultimately, though, the Dominion suffers from the problem of all centralized states. While extremely centralized states are able to marshal much larger and more powerful armies, as well as better utilize the resources of their territory, the issue is they're much more unstable. And basically, if an extremely centralized society loses any of its leadership, it normally collapses entirely or goes into infighting, as there's often not a very clear line of succession. And that's kind of what happens to Dominion. Section 31, I think it's Section 31, succeeds in planting a virus on Odo, and when he goes to the Great Link, he transfers it to them. With virtually all the Changelings slowly dying of a terminal illness, the Dominion is ultimately forced to surrender and withdraw from the Alpha and Beta quadrants forever. Whether or not the Dominion will attempt to invade them again, or if their seemingly limitless expansion will eventually allow them to come in contact with them with conventional means, we don't really know. Maybe Odo's experience living among solids and returning to the Great Link will change their perspective somewhat. But the Dominion remains a very kind of unique and interesting power in contrast to everything else we've seen in the Star Trek universe. It's sad that the original timeline is now dead, and we'll probably never see anything more about the Dominion or any of the other powers. And it's sad because there was a lot of interesting Vorcha, most notably Weyoun, and it was interesting to see how the Klingons reacted to a species that was physically stronger than them but lacked all concept of honor. At any rate, that is the Sci-Fi Pol Sci episode about the Dominion in Star Trek. I hope you enjoyed it, and talk to you guys later.